You hear it all the time, right? Countries are just drowning in debt. The US owes trillions, China owes trillions. Pretty much every country owes some insane amount of money. But that brings up a really simple, kind of weird question. If everybody's in debt, who exactly is all this money owed to? All right, let's get into it. So the number we're dealing with here is, well, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Global debt is now over $300 trillion. That is more than 3 times the value of everything the entire planet produces in a whole year. It's a number so huge it just kind of stops making sense. Okay, to try and put that in perspective, just picture this for a second. If you took $300 trillion in $1 bills and you stacked them all up, that pile of cash would be tall enough to get you to the moon and back 50 times. That's the scale of the promise we've made to pay someone back. Which, brings us right back to our big mystery. Who is this ultimate creditor? Who's sitting on a pile of IOUs from the entire planet? Is it some secret global bank? Aliens? Well, the answer, it turns out, is way closer to home. And it shows us that our whole modern world isn't built on being stable, but on being in constant motion. I mean, at its core, debt is an ancient idea. It's just a promise, right? You borrow from your future self to fix a problem you have today. But what started as a simple IOU between neighbors, well, it's become the engine that runs our entire global economy. It's this never-ending cycle of borrowing and lending that fuels everything, from the roads we drive on to our retirement accounts. So, to crack this puzzle, the first thing we need to do is look inside just one country. You see, the answer doesn't start with some shadowy international banker. It starts much, much closer to home. It starts with us. Let's just use the world's most indebted country as our example, the United States. They have a national debt of $36 trillion. So the question is pretty obvious. Who on earth has that kind of money to lend? And here is the big surprise. I mean, we always hear about countries like China holding US debt, right? But the vast majority, get this, a whopping 70% of it is actually owed to Americans themselves. So for the most part, the United States is borrowing from itself. But how does that even work? Well, it happens through something you can think of as a savings loop. And it starts with you. When you put your savings into a bank or into your pension fund, that money doesn't just sit in a vault. Those big institutions, they need to make that money grow. So what do? They buy one of the safest investments on the planet, government bonds. The government then takes that money and uses it for things like building schools or fixing roads. And then when it pays interest on those bonds, that money flows right back into your pension or your savings account. See? It's a loop. So debt creates this really powerful self-funding loop inside a country. Now just take that exact same idea and scale it up to the entire globe. What you get is this massive, interconnected, global money go-round. Every country is doing this. Savings from people in Japan might be used to buy Dutch government bonds. Dutch pension funds might then invest in Brazilian infrastructure projects. And then Brazilian banks might turn around and park their reserves in those super safe American bonds. It's not a straight line from one lender to one borrower. It's a giant web where everybody is both. And this really gets to the core of how this whole system works. It's not some static pile of unpaid bills just waiting to blow up. It's a dynamic, circular system. Money is always flowing from savers to borrowers and back again, crossing borders, changing hands in this sort of perpetual dance. Okay, so if the government spends all the money it borrows, how does it ever actually pay it back? Well, here's the not-so-secret secret. For the most part, it doesn't. When old debt is due, the government just issues new debt to pay it off. Now, that might sound totally reckless, but this whole process of rolling over the debt is literally the foundation of our modern global economy. So that leads to a really important question. Why? Why do we do this? Why is our entire world built on what seems like a pretty shaky system of nonstop borrowing? The answer is, well, it's both simple and kind of unsettling. The uncomfortable truth is that debt is what fuels economic growth. When a government borrows and spends, that money flows out into the economy, and it creates this positive feedback loop of expansion. But the reverse is also true. If a government is forced to stop borrowing, what economists call austerity, that loop goes into reverse. I mean, just look at what happened to Greece after the 2008 crisis. When the lending stopped, the spending stopped, and their entire economy shrank by a catastrophic 25%. And we are seriously dependent on this system. In China right now, almost 1 out of every 5 yuan the government spends is borrowed money. And in the US, it's even higher. about 1 in every $4. To just suddenly stop that flow would be like trying to turn off the engine of a plane in the middle of a flight. And sometimes it isn't even about growth, it's just about pure survival. During a massive crisis like the 2020 pandemic, when everyone stops spending, the government has to step in and become the spender of last resort. In that 1 year alone, the US government borrowed an incredible $3.8 trillion. That wasn't a choice, it was an absolute necessity to stop a complete economic meltdown. So what we have is a system that's built on perpetual motion. It's fueled by a constant cycle of new debt paying off old debt. And it works as long as the music keeps playing. But what happens when it stops? The ultimate risk here is something called a sovereign default. This is when a country just runs out of options and has to tell all its lenders, sorry, we can't pay you back. It isn't just a missed payment. It's like an economic heart attack that can paralyze an entire nation. The road to that collapse often follows a really dangerous pattern. It starts when the interest payments just get too big. Then, a desperate government might try to just print money to pay its bills. But as all that new money floods the system, its value just collapses. That leads to inflation, and in the worst cases, this death spiral of hyperinflation that completely wipes out the savings of an entire population. And if you want to see just how devastating this can be, look at Venezuela in the late 2010s. The government printed so much money that their currency became basically worthless. Just imagine seeing your entire life savings suddenly become unable to buy you a single loaf of bread. That is the terrifying reality of hyperinflation. So when people start to lose faith in this system of paper promises, they start looking for something real. And that's exactly what we're starting to see signs of today. Investors are flocking to physical assets. Gold and silver prices are hitting multi-year, even multi-decade highs. You've got major banks now forecasting even bigger gains. That's a pretty clear signal that the risk in the traditional system is being seen as a lot higher. So, in the end, who is the money owed to? It's owed mostly to ourselves, to our future selves, through our pension funds, our banks, and our savings. Our entire economy isn't built on a vault of gold, it's built on a web of promises. And that leaves us with the biggest, most important question of all. What happens when we can no longer afford to keep them?